This video will be on how to check the clearances on a Subaru oil pump. This should apply to all EJ motors. I'm not sure about the newer FA, but it's actually pretty straightforward. However, there's not a ton of information online, both on even how to do it, what to measure, and what the specs are. So, I've done some researching and I think I found some of the information. So, this is the oil pump. Not much to it. I've already disassembled and cleaned it up a little. But what you want to do is pop the back cover off here. There's just 5 screws. So once you get it off, you want to inspect for any scratches. And there's a couple you can actually see on this. And I think a good rule of thumb is if your fingernails catch it, which don't mind my nasty fingernails, then you might have issues, which mine slightly do. So this may be a junk pump. And the reason I'm even doing this is I had slightly low oil pressure. It wasn't horrible, but lower, a bit lower than I would like. So inside you have the rotors, you have the inner, you have the outer, you have the pump housing, I guess you could call it. And these actually just pop out really easily. There's really nothing holding them in other than this cover. So you want to do the same on these. Check for scratches, which you can kind of see along here. Hopefully the camera's getting that. Which, they're not horrible, but you can slightly feel them. Check the other side too. The other side actually is a little worse. And then inside the housing itself, there's actually a good amount of grooves. And those ones, yeah, very slight. So once you've kind of inspected that, if yours don't have any scratches or you can't feel them with your fingernails, you're probably good to go. So what you'll do is you'll put the outer rotor back in. With the dot facing up. Put the inner back in with the dot facing up. So you want the dots to meet up here. So first off, we'll measure the case to rotor housing clearance. And the spec on that is 0.1 to 0.175 millimeters. And I'll put the inches in as well. So 0.1 to I don't have a 0.75 feeler gauge, but I have 0.8. And then with the maximum limit being 0.2 millimeters. So let's check this. We'll just start with the smallest. It's very little resistance. We'll just work our way up to 1.3 millimeters. It's a little tough to tell because it is curving as you go, so it might give a false kind of reading. So maybe check a few spots even. Okay, work our way up 0.15 millimeters. It's definitely getting tighter. Go to 1.8 millimeters. All right, that's very tight. So we'll just for fun, we'll test the 0.2, which is the limit. So that barely fits, I would say. That's not at all. So 1.8, it might be, because again, I don't have the 0.175, this is slightly larger than it should be. However, it also doesn't fit very well, whereas the 0.15 does. So this is likely within spec. It's on the looser end of that tolerance, but still within spec. Next, we'll measure the tip, rotor tip to rotor tip. The spec for rotor tip clearance is 0.04 to 0.14 millimeters. So 0.04 going all the way up to, this goes up to 0.13 and 0.15, so kind of right in between there, with the limit of the spec being, or the maximum allowable limit is 0.18 millimeters. So we'll do the same thing. We'll just start with the smallest and work our way up. Here's 0.06. Oh, two stacked there. And make sure they're definitely lined up as centered as possible, so you're getting the most accurate reading. So right there, 0.8. So this is right about in the middle, a little less, so that is a good pump according to this. Next, we will measure the rotor to cover clearance. They also call this end play. So this is essentially the rotor to this cover, the distance in between the two. Now, you can do this either with a depth micrometer, which I do not have, or you can use a precision straight edge and the feeler gauge. Now, I actually don't have one that would work in this situation because where the rotor cover sits is actually recessed. And let's see if we can get this to focus here. There's actually a lip here, which goes all the way around. So everything, I guess, where the bolts that would connect this to the block are is raised, and this is all recessed. So the straight edge I have is far too long and wouldn't get an accurate reading. But the spec for the end play is 0.02 to 0.07 millimeters. So I'll just kind of give a demonstration, even though I can't properly measure myself, with a limit of 0.15. So you would lay your straight edge, somewhere along, and you could measure it multiple ways even. And then you would slide your feeler gauge under there, and you should probably check both rotors, the inner and the outer, just to make sure that it's within that spec of 0.02 to 0.07 millimeters. Now, due to mine being scratched a little, who knows why, maybe this was on an engine that had failed at one point. I'm hesitant that maybe this will be out of spec. Now, I can't measure it, but I'm also considering not running this due to the scratches that I showed earlier. And knowing that my car has just slightly less oil pressure than I would like, and I actually have shimmed the relief valve at one point. I added a factory shim. It came with one in it, so now it has two. And that did bump up the pressure just a couple PSI, but still, at idle, I'm around 16 to 18 pounds, which is a little lower than I would like to see, especially when it gets really hot on a hot day. So this is how you measure the clearances on your pump. If you're worried that it might be too low, or if you're worried about oil pressure, this is a good place to check. I probably won't run this or maybe even I'll polish, see if I can like polish it with fine sandpaper. Though that could also affect the clearance, which I will try to find a depth gauge or a shorter also be careful with these. They're very tight fit. You don't want to jam them in. You just want them to kind of fall into place, as you might end up damaging something, creating a sharp edge, which could cause more issues. So when you reassemble, make sure to have the dots lining up. Put your plate back on, and now it is a common issue for these bolts here to actually loosen. I've read quite a few accounts of that. Some people online suggest using some Loctite on these bolts that go in here. Definitely couldn't hurt. Probably use blue. I wouldn't use a red Loctite. There we go. Just make sure the orientation is correct. It's very little Loctite if you choose so. And you torque these to approximately, I believe, 4 foot-pounds. I don't know what that is in inch-pounds. You'll have to convert that yourself. But it's definitely worth torquing them properly. A little bit of Loctite as not to have this back off due to engine vibrations. And that is how you measure the rotor clearances. That's how you reassemble. One other important thing I should mention is the relief valve. I actually won't undo this one, as I don't have another crush washer to replace. But if you're looking into shimming it or anything, you pop this off, and you want to ensure that the little cylinder is clean, has no burrs, has no markings on the edges. You want to also ensure the bore, so look inside the bore and make sure that it has no scratches or anything, as that could affect the operation of the cylinder moving within the bore. And if it is, I'd probably recommend either a new pump, new housing, or if you have a way to hone it, although that might affect clearances. And I will show a picture here of what the internals here look like. So you have the bolt, as you can see here. You have the washer, that's a crush washer. You have a spring, and you have the, I believe they refer to it as the relief valve itself. Now you'll actually also have shims potentially. This is a 10 millimeter that a WRX, or came off of a 2-liter WRX, and it had one shim already. I added a second shim, and I believe that goes kind of in the relief valve and under the spring. So that is how that's the exploded diagram. Now I won't, like I said, I won't undo that myself just because I don't have another crush washer to replace with at the moment. And then, of course, it's always wise to replace the seal just while you're in there. It's a couple bucks, I'm sure, and a good idea. Anyway, that is how to service, or should I say check, your oil pump. If it's within those specs, definitely safe to run. If it's on the outer end of those specs, you know, it could be worth replacing. I'm actually unsure if you can get the rotors from Subaru as new. You want to match them in a pair if you do buy new ones. You want to get an inner and an outer. Again, I'm not sure if those are actually, you can purchase those separately or not.